trapped in a 3-foot wall space with a bleeding mafia boss while assassins destroy the apartment outside. The penthouse was crawling with armed intruders. Gunfire had just taken down the city's most untouchable kingpin. But Patricia, a blind woman who had spent 7 months mapping his apartment by touch, seamlessly dragged the bleeding boss into a hidden panic room. As the assassins tore the place apart just inches away, Paul Sawyers realized his life was entirely in the hands of the blind waitress he swore to protect.
Let's step into the heavy quiet of the late night, you and I. Picture Patricia. She is not just quiet panting. She is a quiet battle. We watch her worn-out shoes tapping a desperate rhythm. 47 steps from the diner door to the first table, 11 more to the coffee pot. Dodging that shattered floor tile, 4 steps left, dodging that shattered just to keep her fragile sanity intact. But the subway is a different kind of nightmare. It is a sensory flood of rustling bags and cheap perfume. A place that strips away her boundaries and leaves her completely exposed to the city's wandering shadows. It is a harsh truth to swallow. Sometimes, trauma forces us to build massive, invisible walls just to make it through an ordinary Tuesday. Take a step back and look at the sheer weight of her reality. Pure exhaustion leaves the body dangerous, fragile, wide open to the cruelest hands. Patricia is practically dead on her feet, her knuckles white as she grips the freezing metal pole, a wooden cane jammed between her shaking knees. She counts down the night collapse in agonizing stops until she can finally collapse in a cold, empty room. Her mind completely blocks out the burning ache in her feet after a brutal double shift serving callous people who tossed her a few coins just to feel generous. $61. She counted those crumpled bills twice. It breaks your heart to watch. We all try to build tiny, predictable habits when we feel like we are drowning in a world that takes far more than it ever gives. There is a brutal, agonizing math to poverty, and it crushes the human spirit. Her electric bill is $78, but she only has 61 to her name. Just 12 stops left when the universe completely betrays her. The train violently jerks sideways, shattering her fragile safety bubble. Her numb fingers slip from the cold metal rail, and her wooden cane clatters against the filthy floor. Any ordinary person would flail, reaching out to brace themselves. But Patricia just surrenders. She is so deeply used to the world rejecting her that she simply lets gravity take her down. It is a devastating reality to witness. Sometimes, a person will willingly embrace the physical pain of a fall just to avoid the suffocating, heavy weight of public pity. Stay with me here, because the harsh smack of the floor never comes. Instead, she crashes right into a wall of solid muscle. It is pure warmth, the sudden scent of insanely expensive wool against her cheek. She stammers a panicked apology, desperately trying to pull away. But her exhausted body simply betrays her. Her aching muscles melt right into the heavy, terrifying safety of this stranger. Then, his massive hand drops onto her shaking shoulder. He does not just hold her. He claims her with the chilling confidence of a man who never hears the word no. He whispers a single word: don't. It is a haunting reminder about human vulnerability. When your soul is entirely drained, even the darkest, most dangerous shadows can masquerade as a safe place to rest. That impossibly deep voice vibrates right through her weary bones, settling deep in her chest. The air inside the train car goes completely dead. It is that primal, suffocating panic that hits when an actual apex predator steps into the room. But Patricia cannot process the threat. She does not see the violent ink crawling up his throat, or the brutal syndicate tattoos stamped across his knuckles. Every other passenger is frozen. A man across the aisle hides behind his phone, and a couple shrinks back toward the doors in pure terror. She is completely blind to the absolute monster holding her close. It is a haunting reality check for every single one of us. Sometimes our failure to see the full, terrifying picture can lead us straight into the waiting arms of massive danger. Now, here is where the story shifts into something deeply unsettling. All Patricia can feel is the deceptive, quiet gentleness of his heavy hand. Throwing every last survival instinct away, her exhausted brain completely fails to sound the alarm. The crushing weight on her shoulder silently demands that she stay put, perfectly bypassing all her rational defenses. This tired waitress, with exactly $61 to her name, just completely surrenders. She keeps her face buried against the expensive coat of a ruthless killer. For the first time in years, she simply closes her eyes and stops fighting the shadows. It is a bitter, tragic truth. Deep, unending isolation can easily make the most toxic shelter feel like genuine, unconditional love. She truly believes she just found 14 quick stops of safe, quiet rest. She is completely clueless that this man is already plotting out the rest of her entire life. Enter Paul Sawyers. He is a human supercomputer, constantly calculating cold variables and utterly devoid of normal empathy. He literally measures his days in the exact seconds it takes to crush a rival empire. Babysitting a sleeping woman on a rattling subway was never part of his plan. But his private driver made a fatal error tonight, forcing this untouchable boss onto a dirty train at 51st Street. It shows you how deeply terrifying fate can be. Life turns on one single random glitch, effortlessly tossing a fragile soul directly into the destructive path of a massive hurricane. You and I have to pause and appreciate the dark irony of this moment. Men like Paul absolutely despise situations they cannot manipulate. He just swallowed his pride, sitting in a dark corner in a custom-tailored suit, likely calculating his next ruthless extortion racket. Then the train violently jerks, and pure, fragile chaos drops right into his lap. She faceplants against him, entirely oblivious that he is the most lethal man in the city. Her cane hits the floor. She does not scream. Instead, her exhausted head rests against his leg as she lets out a tiny, broken sigh. Her complete lack of fear totally short-circuits his massive ego. It proves something profound. Quiet innocence has the power to deeply rattle even the most terrifying figures in the dark. It was a heartbreaking, fragile little sound caught perfectly between a tired sigh and total surrender. Now, watch what this calculating man does next. She goes totally rigid for a split second, then instantly melts into a heavy, dreamless sleep. Paul stares down at her pale face with the dark fascination of a predator, studying a trapped moth. He is literally scanning her for weakness. He notes the frayed collar of her cheap shirt. He spots the painful calluses on her hands from gripping that heavy cane. For a man who built an empire on exploiting the desperate, her pure exhaustion is basically a gold mine. It is a terrifying warning sign we often ignore. Truly, toxic people do not want equals. They hunt for broken pieces they can completely control. So why doesn't he just push her away into the cold aisle? Because in his twisted mind, he is already treating her like his personal property. Suddenly, a random guy reeking of cheap subway liquor spots her passing out and leans in with a sickening, predatory grin. Paul does not yell. He does not even flinch. He simply executes a chilling, slow-motion turn of his head. He glares at the drunk with the deadly, suffocating aura of a boss who ends entire bloodlines before breakfast. The creep instantly folds, staring at his shoes, terrified to even breathe. It is a striking lesson about the nature of real power. True darkness never has to raise its voice. Just sitting there quietly is enough to make the entire world back away in fear. Another passenger, just a poor teenager riding the late train, accidentally steps too close. Paul expects the entire world to obey his silent rules. He simply lifts one finger, pointing to a metal pole on the far side of the aisle. The kid scurries over instantly, trusting that primal gut instinct to run from pure danger. For the next 11 stops, Paul projects an insane, suffocating aura, wrapping a massive, invisible shield around his new obsession. No shouting, no fists, just the terrifying gravity of a man who knows a quiet threat cuts the deepest. Meanwhile, Patricia sleeps right past her stop. It is a grim reality we must face. The worst predators don't snatch you away fighting. They quietly watch you sleep past your only safe exit. We need to look closely at this final moment together. Just you and I, she has, an emergency medical card taped to her cane, lying completely ignored on the floor. When the train finally hits the end of the line, a night janitor walks up, takes one terrified look at Paul's cold eyes, and simply vanishes right back into the shadows. Sitting in that dead, quiet, empty car, Paul analyzes her like a hostile corporate takeover. She has zero money. She is not a threat. She is just a fragile human who crashed into his darkness without a single hidden motive. In a life where everyone wants something, finding a soul this pure is the ultimate trigger. It leaves us with a terrifying lesson. Absolute innocence is often the strongest magnet for the darkest obsessions. Step into the dark with me tonight. There was no grand deception here. Patricia simply gave out, her exhausted body shutting down. Paul pulls his phone from his coat, his face a total mask, and quietly summons a car. He sits in the stillness, listening to her slow breathing until a dark sedan glides to the curb. It teaches us a brutal reality. When your soul is starving for peace, you will easily close your eyes right inside the jaws of a trap. He lifts her gently, handling her like fragile glass, his watch reading exactly 1:07 in the morning. 41 minutes gone. He gathers her up like a stolen treasure, erasing her freedom in the quiet night. When Patricia finally opens her eyes, the first thing she feels is a heavy, suffocating silence. The dark surrounds her, and instantly a cold realization sets in. Something is terribly wrong. This is far from the crumbling home she knew on Delancey Street with its broken pipes and thin walls. No, this silence is heavy, artificial, purchased with blood money. As Patricia slowly wakes, her worn hands graze the sheets, and her instincts register the truth. Egyptian cotton, impossibly soft, swallowing her frail frame to keep her docile. She has been placed gently into a cage of pure gold. It is a quiet heartbreak, reminding us of a lesson we all eventually face. The traps that truly capture us are never made of rusted iron. They are woven beautifully from the exact comfort we have spent our whole lives crying out for. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Patricia lies frozen on that plush mattress, locked deep in survival mode. Without her sight, she maps the unseen room through every other sense. The icy bite of conditioned air, the rich scent of aged cedar, even the soft carpet beneath her heels feels dangerous in its luxury. Then the suffocating silence breaks. The boss speaks from the deep shadows, his voice the smooth, terrifying hum of a hunter who has already claimed his prize. "You took my train," she whispers, forcing her tone to remain entirely flat. It is a desperate bid to hold on to a sliver of control. We have all been there, when life backs you into a dark corner. Sometimes your only true defense is simply refusing to let the monster see you bleed. "You took my lap," Paul replies, his deep voice hanging thick in the heavy air. The dawn rises slowly, his quiet footsteps entirely swallowed by the vast room. He stops exactly 8 feet away. It is a calculated distance, close enough to make her feel hunted, yet far enough to keep her panic tethered. Then a sharp clink echoes as a cup touches the table. The rich aroma of fresh coffee drifts toward her. It is a quiet psychological trap designed to soften her edges. "There is a contract on the table," he states, devoid of all emotion. But Patricia remains a statue. She would rather waste away than accept his charity. It is a brutal lesson in survival. True power is refusing a warm meal when it is graciously offered by the very same hand that holds the knife. "I am blind," she states plainly. "I am aware," he replies, without missing a beat. Those 3 soft words seal her tragedy completely. This was no random abduction in the night. The boss hunted her specifically. He lays out a staggering offer: 1 year locked within these velvet walls for $5 million. But the true horror hides in his quiet conditions. When she asks about walking away, the temperature in the room plummets. He casually speaks the name of her toxic ex, Mark, weaponizing her miserable past to paint himself as her dark savior. It is terrifying how accurate this lesson is. Real evil rarely drags you away screaming into the night. It simply convinces you that the storm outside is far deadlier than the raging fire burning inside your own home. Watch carefully as his silent mind games erode her walls. The coffee sits cooling, and in a moment of weakness, she reaches out and grasps the cup flawlessly without seeing it. It is a quiet mistake. She reveals her hidden capability, and the dawn mentally archives that detail. The bitter warmth hits her tongue, a reminder that he controls every sensation in this room. "I want to go home to Mark," she whispers. It breaks the heart to watch her choose a familiar hell over a gilded cage she cannot understand. But this is the raw truth of human nature. We often run back to toxic people simply because we already know how to survive their specific kind of damage. Paul does not raise his voice. He simply agrees. He opens the heavy door, a calculated move to completely shatter her reality. "You and I are going to unpack this moment together." She slips her tired feet into worn shoes and steps back into the screaming chaos of the city. The shift in atmosphere hits like a physical blow. A moment ago, she breathed the still air of a velvet tomb, and now her lungs burn with heavy smog. Paul leans in for his final checkmate. "The number is in the right pocket," he murmurs. Notice his absolute certainty. That quiet confidence belongs to a predator who understands exactly how to weaponize your trauma. As the car merges into the dark night, her trembling fingers already seek out that pocket. Sometimes, the lifelines we pray will rescue us are simply elegant new leashes, pulling us straight into a much prettier cage. The luxurious cashmere coat draped across her shoulders feels heavy as lead. It wraps around her like a phantom embrace, a tangible reminder of the safety the dawn promised. For 7 city blocks, she forces her hands to remain perfectly still, warring against the urge to check that pocket. But her mind is betraying her. She cannot stop weighing the profound peace of his estate against the sour stench of liquor and explosive anger waiting at her apartment. At the 7th turn, her resolve finally breaks. Her trembling fingers slide down, brushing the heavy cardstock of the boss's calling card. She holds it, paralyzed. Life teaches us a painful truth. We will eagerly grasp a beautifully wrapped bottle of poison, simply because the bitter cure feels far too terrifying to face completely alone. Watch her body language as she arrives at the rusted door of her crumbling reality. Every tiny movement is governed by pure survival instinct. She ignores the metal lockbox, instead digging a spare key from the cold dirt beneath a broken step. Why? Because a lockbox makes a metallic click, and that microscopic sound is enough to awaken the beast waiting inside. That dirty key buys her 3 seconds of borrowed peace. She presses her ear against the peeling paint, mapping the threat level within. A television blares, a heavy glass slams violently down onto wood. The air feels agonizingly thick. It hits you with a devastating truth. A home is meant to be a sanctuary of rest, not a psychological battlefield where you spend every waking second bracing for the next sudden explosion. The brass knob turns and the door groans open to reveal Mark, his breathing ragged in the gloom. "Where have you been?" he barks from the shadows. It is not a question. It is the opening strike of a mental ambush. Notice how Patricia's face instantly goes dead, burying her panic so he has nothing to feed upon. The worn springs of the sofa shriek as he shifts his weight. "I got stuck on the train." She lies smoothly, forcing her voice flat to deny him any ammunition. He sneers at her words, twisting them to make her feel small, before demanding her daily earnings. She only brought home $61. He expects $78. Financial star control is truly one of the most suffocating chains a cruel person can ever wrap around your throat. Thot tying Tagar. Stick with me here. The silence in that cramped room sweats toxic energy. Mark slams his glass onto the table, a violent crack that makes her flinch. It is a classic warning shot. He groans about being hungry, twisting logic to blame his failures on her. When she softly offers to cook, he responds with a cruel laugh. Patricia slips into her practiced routine. 14 precise steps to the sticky counter, 7 paces to the stove. She drifts through the shadows like a ghost haunting the ruins of her life. But as the water runs over her hands, she completely freezes. The air in the room has radically changed Taitafai through Parnot. The greatest survival lesson you will ever learn is to never ignore that cold alarm in your gut. Trusting that quiet radar is often your last line of defense. Pay close attention to this moment. She stands frozen by the sink, mapping the dark room. She isolates the hum of television static and Mark's ragged breathing. She catches the greasy scent of takeout he devoured while she was out suffering. But then, drifting beneath the grime, her senses lock onto something entirely foreign, a rich, heavy fragrance that has no business existing in this decaying room. She turns in slow motion, approaching the sagging sofa as if creeping toward a coiled serpent. The tension peaks as her trembling hand reaches out, slipping between the torn fabric of the cushions. Life drops a profound truth right here. Sometimes the smallest inconsistency in your dark world is the exact spark you need to finally wake up and break your chains. You and I are going to unpack this quiet tragedy together. Picture Patricia in her living room, the air thick with a ghost. Her fingers graze a stranger's expensive cashmere draped over her chair. Then the scent hits her, a heavy, suffocating perfume that does not belong to her. Another woman was in her sanctuary. Does she scream? No. Her expression turns to pure stone. This is the tragic reflex of someone who knows that showing weakness just feeds the enemy. She forcefully swallows her toxic heartbreak, refusing to let the betrayer 3 feet away see her bleed. Here is a quiet lesson for tonight. Sometimes the most deafening screams are hidden behind complete silence, and basic survival simply means locking your pain far away from the ones who caused it. Patricia whispers she is going to bed, dropping those fragile words into the suffocating tension. Mark offers absolute radio silence. That quiet disrespect lands like a final blow. She drifts into the pitch-black bedroom, curling up on the furthest edge of the mattress. Staring at the dark Waitress, she shivers but refuses to touch the blanket. That is the exact moment her spirit shatters. It is not just the betrayal that destroys her. It is the agonizing weight of being entirely invisible to the man she swore to love. She has been bleeding for a romance that died years ago. The lesson here is brutal. You have to stop clinging to a familiar cage simply because you recognize the lock. You must find the courage to walk away so your soul can finally breathe. The tension thickens as Patricia slips her shaking fingers into her coat pocket, finding a thick business card. The weight of that paper feels exactly like the man who gave it to her. Dangerous, radiating the dark energy of a boss who owns the city. Outside, the midnight streets hiss under a cold rain. She glances at Mark, sleeping beside her, watching his chest to ensure he is completely out cold. Only then does she trace the embossed numbers in the dark, burning them into her memory. She will sit inside this quiet nightmare for 4 agonizing days before taking her leap. It leaves us with a haunting lesson tonight. A broken soul will tightly grip the rusted bars of a familiar cage, simply because the vast, open sky outside feels far too terrifying to face entirely on your own. Stick with me here, because this moment is heartbreaking. We see cheap, wilted carnation. Patricia grips the vase so tightly her knuckles turn white under the harsh lights. Mark lingers in the doorway, wearing the most hollow smile imaginable. She can smell the cheap plastic wrap around those dying flowers, a pathetic scent desperately trying to mask his mountain of deception. Yet she does not scream. She merely offers a single empty nod. Her silence is never about being clueless. It is the pure exhaustion of a woman whose spirit has been bled completely dry. Here is the quiet wisdom you should remember tonight. We almost always sense the bitter poison seeping into the soil long before the beautiful garden finally drops dead. By the 3rd day, her home feels like a suffocating trap. The phone to her sister drops with a cold, metallic click, severing her last tie to the world. Driven by pure desperation, Patricia finally dials Paul. The line connects instantly. There is no polite greeting, just the slow breathing of an apex predator who always knew she would break. Minutes later, a sleek black sedan idles at her curb. Sliding into the shadowed back seat, she pulls a rich cashmere blanket around her trembling shoulders. The tragic irony is truly overwhelming. She is seeking safety from the exact mastermind who engineered her absolute ruin. The lesson hits with brutal force. Sometimes the most dangerous choice is blindly grabbing a rescuing hand in the dark, because that very same hand might lock you inside a much darker cell. The camera follows her trembling steps into a massive glass penthouse. Patricia immediately feels the crushing weight of the space. Paul stands there, effortlessly consuming every ounce of oxygen. She catches the scent of expensive dark wood mixed with raw danger. He drops a devastating remark, noting exactly how many days she made him wait. His voice is incredibly smooth, yet it slices right to the bone. Shadows swallow her whole as she sinks into a heavy leather chair. Far below them, the frantic city sirens fade into absolute nothingness. He has entirely erased her from the outside world. This reveals a truly chilling lesson. Real power never actually needs to raise its voice or threaten you. It simply builds you an impossibly gorgeous room and then very quietly locks the door from the outside. A heavy click echoes as Paul presses play on a sleek silver recorder. He softly commands her to listen, and the quiet room shatters. Within seconds, Patricia is choking on her own panicked breath. The grainy audio belongs to Mark, her supposedly loving husband. He is speaking to a lawyer, his tone flat and entirely dead inside. The camera holds steady as a single, devastating tear cuts down her cheek. The horrific truth sets in. Her entire marriage was a meticulously built cage. This was no simple drift. It was a cold-blooded assassination of her future. It leaves us with a deeply unsettling lesson tonight. The absolute scariest monsters do not lurk in the dark woods. No, they are sitting right across from you at the morning breakfast table, gently smiling over a warm cup of coffee. You and I are witnessing a terrifying masterclass in betrayal. As the recording rolls, the nightmare deepens. Mark casually mentions her cognitive decline, actively pushing for full power of attorney. He is weaponizing the law to legally bury his own wife alive. Through the lens, we see Patricia turn entirely to ice. There is no chaotic sobbing, no dramatic collapse. She hardens into a pale marble statue, staring into the dark void. It is the primal survival instinct of a cornered animal playing dead. Every cold syllable adds another heavy brick to her tomb, yet her face betrays nothing. It offers a profound lesson on human pain. The most fatal damage another person can inflict will never leave a physical bruise. Instead, it quietly freezes your living soul from the inside out. The recording cuts off with a sharp snap, leaving a suffocating silence in the room. Patricia finally crumbles, her posture collapsing under the crushing weight of a decade built on lies. The foundation of her reality has been reduced to ash. The camera pans to Paul, standing still in the deep shadows, watching the violent rain batter the glass. He offers no warm embrace, no meaningless words of comfort. Instead, he smoothly slides a thick contract across the desk. It is a terrifying display of dark psychology, tossing a life raft to a woman who is actively drowning in despair. This haunting moment hands us a bitter truth tonight. The strongest bonds of loyalty are rarely formed during peaceful days. They are forged deep inside the smoking, toxic ruins of a completely shattered heart. The frame tightens as her trembling fingers glide across the freezing desk. That single object holds the terrifying gravity of a black hole. Hollow heart. With a hollow heart, Patricia drags the ink across the page, signing her freedom away in 2 frantic strokes. She is in a total free fall. From the shadows, Paul murmurs, "Day 1. His deep voice vibrates through the floorboards. She is officially caged again. But here is the twisted irony of this tragedy. The calculated isolation of this dark high-rise actually feels much safer than the deceptive home she just fled. It reveals a tragic reality about human survival. When your spirit is ground completely into dust, knowing the exact dimensions of your new prison can trick your broken brain into believing you are finally safe. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? The scene fades, marking the agonizing passage of 3 days. Patricia haunts the penthouse like a restless phantom, walking barefoot across the marble. She counts every footstep, trailing her fingers along the icy walls. She is memorizing how her breathing echoes in the kitchen and clocking the heavy thud of the study door. Above all, she is tuning her nervous system to the dangerous electric charge that floods the air whenever Paul enters the room. She is quietly reprogramming her shattered mind to survive the orbit of a new predator. It leaves us with a beautifully grim lesson. We possess the terrifying ability to endure the absolute darkest nightmares, just as long as we can map out exactly where our new walls are standing. The camera glides into a luxurious closet. Patricia runs her hands over endless racks of designer clothing. She feels the weight of pure cashmere, cold silk, and premium leather. As she inspects the garments, a deeply unsettling realization hits. Every single piece is tailored to her exact measurements. Paul had been watching from the shadows, sizing up her life long before she knew he existed. Swallowing a rising tide of panic, she makes a chilling choice. She leans into the twisted romance of being his captive, blending into his untouchable world. This leaves us with a painfully real lesson on manipulation. The deepest level of control never announces itself with a sudden violent shove. Instead, it quietly approaches from behind, gently wrapping around your freezing shoulders like a warm, heavy coat. 2 entire months simply vanished into the ether. Picture this in your mind. The heavy oak door swings wide, revealing a room swallowed by shadows. Paul pulls Patricia across the threshold, offering zero comfort. It is an act of pure, unspoken dominance. Yet Patricia stands there in a crisp gray blazer, calmly taking it all in. She is mentally counting the wooden chairs scraping the floor. 8 men in total. The air is thick, reeking of cheap cologne and dirty money. But here is where she flips the script. She pours a glass of ice water and fades into the background. Becoming nothing more than a quiet ghost, it leaves us with a profound truth. When life throws you into a den of starving wolves, the wisest move is to make them forget you even have teeth. Never bare your fangs until it is exactly the right moment to strike. The camera drifts over these hardened men of the underworld. They take one look at her unseeing eyes and instantly write her off as a helpless doll. To them, a blind woman is just another prize for Paul to show off. But Patricia absorbs their disrespect without a single flinch. She tunes out the garbage and hones in on an arrogant man named Doyle. He is laughing, loudly bragging about his illicit smuggling routes out of Newark. Another voice casually drops the name of a corrupt politician they just bought. They spill every secret because they assume she is entirely harmless. We are looking at a timeless lesson right here. Arrogance is the ultimate trap. If you let a person become blinded by their own ego, they will eventually hand you the exact weapon you need to bring them down. Look closely at how this heavy scene unfolds, because you and I are going to unpack this together. These hardened men are huddled over the table, so intoxicated by greed, they completely ignore the quiet woman in the corner. They assume she is just a broken bird in Paul's cage. But hidden inside her coat pocket, her thumb flies across a silent braille device. She is logging every detail: the shipping routes, the dirty secrets, the fatal weaknesses. 30 years of darkness gave her an unnatural patience. It reveals a simple, undeniable truth for us tonight. Real power never needs to scream for an audience. True strength gathers in the dark where no one is watching. The weaker they think you are, the easier it becomes to find out exactly where to hit them. Time just melts away in the shadows. After 4 incredibly tense sit-downs, Patricia has constructed a massive mental map of this criminal syndicate. She is tracking the dirty cash and the quiet rivalries. Paul never once asked her to do this. He watches from the edge, waiting to see if his captive bird still has a predator inside. Then, on a violently rainy night, she drifts into his darkened office. She calmly drops the revelation that Doyle is moving far more than timber through Newark. Paul stops his pen immediately. He already suspected Doyle, but Patricia just proved she is a lethal weapon. The takeaway here is a harsh reality. Never wait for someone to grant you permission to show your value. Haunted, build your fire in absolute secrecy and only let it burn when they have nowhere left to run. The tension in this room is suffocating. Imagine the cold shadows slicing across his desk. Patricia keeps her voice perfectly flat as she identifies Doyle. Third chair, left side, wearing a herringbone jacket. Paul goes dead silent. It is the heavy sound of a crime boss realizing his reality has just shifted. He orders her to sit down, and the atmosphere turns genuinely terrifying. "Tell me everything," he demands, still trying to flex that toxic need for control. She folds her hands as if surrendering, but we know the truth. Stick with me here, because this brings us to a very real lesson. Massive disasters, much like deep personal trauma, rarely begin with a loud explosion. They almost always creep into your life, hidden beneath a deafening, terrifying silence. You can feel the bitter violence brewing under the surface. Meetings are rushed. Frantic, hushed phone calls echo down the hallway. It is that toxic, suffocating atmosphere where everyone knows the ground is collapsing, but the boss refuses to admit it. Patricia feels this decay in her very bones. She knows Paul is buckling under the weight of a crumbling empire. Yet, she keeps her mouth shut, which offers us a brutal truth about survival. Sometimes, asking too many questions does not just get you hurt, it completely destroys you. So she waits in the quiet dark. When Paul drags himself through the door at 2 in the morning, she tracks his heavy footsteps. It sounds exactly like a wounded lion pacing in a cage, desperately trying to hold on to whatever tiny shred of power he has left. The liquor cabinet slams shut, leaving behind the terrifying silence of a dangerous man sitting alone in the dark. Patricia appears in the doorway, wrapped in the expensive silk robe he bought her. It looks beautiful, but it is nothing more than a velvet leash. She casually offers him coffee. He tries to maintain his tough exterior, telling her to go to sleep, but she brushes it right off. She walks to the kitchen and pours 2 cups without asking permission. It is strange how trauma operates, forcing you to anticipate the needs of your captor. The lesson we find here is harsh but true. Even the most frightening monsters secretly crave someone to care for them, but their bruised egos will never allow them to ask. She sets the hot cups down and retreats to her quiet corner. A moment later, the fabric of his suit rustles. You know he is moving across the dark room. But here is where the dynamic fractures. He sits insanely far away. He sits insanely close to her. She can feel his exhausted weight sinking into the cushions, the heat radiating off his shoulders. I want you to think about this with me. Over the past few weeks, their shared silence evolved from a terrifying hostage situation to a strange coexistence. But tonight, the silence is thick and vulnerable. It pulls us into a powerful realization. The walls we build to keep the world away will eventually become the exact things that trap us inside. This beast of a crime boss has finally lowered his shield. He is letting her sit inside his danger zone, completely unprotected. How many people know you are stressing out? Her voice cuts cleanly through the dark room. When he whispers back that no one knows, you realize this man has been on the edge of a mental collapse for months. He does not even snap at her. Instead, his hands are visibly shaking as he spins his coffee cup. You can hear his expensive watch clinking against the porcelain. Paul Sawyer's is usually a masterclass in deception. The sharp suits, the intimidating posture, burying his emotions deep down, but life always hits you with the same inevitable truth. Faking your strength forever is the heaviest burden a human being can carry. Patricia sees right through the ruthless Mafia boss act. She only sees a broken man at 2 a.m, holding onto a cup as if it is the only thing keeping him alive. He finally shatters the silence, confessing that a rival crew is trying to steal his territory. His voice is practically gone, stripped of all that dominant energy. Stick with me here, because this is the exact moment everything flips. You can hear pure panic bleeding out of this man. He is exhausted from the paranoia, knowing his own people are hunting him down. Patricia realizes the agonizing isolation he lives in. It brings us to an honest lesson. True loneliness is not found in an empty house. True loneliness is sitting at a table full of people silently praying for your downfall. A police siren fades into the rainy night. He tries to mask his desperation, acting like he rejects her pity, but it is a hollow lie. She calmly sets down her cup, dropping her tension to meet his quiet surrender. For 4 grueling months, this twisted bond had been taking root. It was built entirely in the dark, formed through quiescent routines and the shocking reality that this monster had finally exposed his throat. The hostage has somehow become the only safe harbor for the man keeping her locked away. You do not have to handle this alone right now, she whispers. He freezes, caught in a silence that feels like an eternity. Then his iron armor falls apart. You hear the leather couch groan as his posture breaks, slumping over in defeat. He cannot find a word to say. It is a harsh irony and a painful lesson. Sometimes, in our darkest hours, we seek rescue from the exact same people who caused our ruin in the first place. His breathing slows down, and you know his walls are permanently gone. I want you to pause and really look at the psychology playing out here. You and I have both felt the crushing weight of carrying a secret we could not share. The sound of his jagged breathing is the raw audio of a hardened man breaking apart. They sit high up in this cold glass tower, severed from the violent chaos of the city below. Paul, a ruthless king who wielded fear as a weapon, is now utterly defenseless beside a woman who cannot even see him. The lesson hiding here is profound. Stripping away your protective armor is often the only way to discover who is actually standing underneath. Patricia sits quietly in the dark, listening to his breathing, slowly steady. This is the twisted reality of their trauma bond, and the most painfully authentic moment they have ever shared. Let's be real for a second, you and I. Patricia keeps her most terrifying thoughts buried way down deep in her chest, while the coffee turns to ice on the mahogany table. Nobody is saying a word, but peace is just a total fake-out when you are dealing with the Mafia underground. Long before the giant men with guns even flinch, she feels the air pressure drop in the room. This is pure, raw, animal survival mode. The clock reads 11:43 at night. She stands frozen in the boss's study, her brain scanning the dark like a military radar. The hit squad is already inside the fortress, and they did not knock on the front door. The absolute nightmare has begun. It shows us a brutal fact of life. The deepest scars you carry always end up becoming the exact tools that keep you breathing when tomorrow comes. A heavy vibration starts echoing up from the dark utility shaft, exactly 2 floors beneath their fancy golden penthouse cage. To stay alive in this mob house, she memorized every mechanical heartbeat of the building. This service elevator always groans with a delayed tension on its heavy steel cables. She clocked that fact on day 1 of her captivity. Patricia slowly gets up from her velvet chair. Exactly 4 seconds later, the entire power grid is wiped out. Pitch-black darkness hits the confused guards like a brick wall. Down the hallway, she hears Briggs, a giant bodyguard, screaming commands into a radio. But the hit squad already jammed it to dead static. Total chaos takes over. It drops a heavy truth on us. Arrogance will always blind powerful people to the tiny details that actually get them killed. Heavy combat boots slam against the expensive hardwood as a guard sprints blindly down the pitch-black corridor. You can hear the raw, bleeding terror in his frantic stumbling. A sickening shatter of priceless Murano glass confirms he is completely lost in the dark. Then, a deafening blast shakes the very foundation of the mansion. It strikes the hidden service entry near the kitchen. These predators were inside the walls long before they killed the lights. Patricia stands completely frozen, fighting the animal urge to turn and flee. Instead of running blindly into the gunfire, she begins to count her exact steps into the terrifying abyss. It reminds us of a vital life lesson. When chaos descends and the world falls apart, giving in to panic is the absolute fastest route to your own destruction. Patricia glides through the heavy darkness with chilling precision. 12 calm, measured strides from the study to the edge of the sprawling sitting room. She pivots left, taking 4 smooth steps to bypass a massive oak trunk. 8 perfect paces later, her trembling fingertips brush the cold, familiar marble of the fireplace mantel. The entire mansion is drowning in violent chaos, but she remains anchored to the floor. Through the horrific screams echoing down the hall, she tracks the methodical footsteps of 4 distinct killers. Paul's guards thrash blindly in the shadows, dying like frightened prey. It leaves us with a profound life lesson. When your world suddenly goes dark, the only map that truly matters is the one you painstakingly built in your own mind. Picture this moment with me. The darkness is absolute, with pure chaos bleeding through every edge of the house. Suddenly, Patricia hears a heavy, sickening thud of impact. Paul, the supposedly untouchable titan of the underworld, releases a guttural gasp of pure physical agony. The great megalomaniac has finally been struck down. But Patricia does not shed a single tear for him. Operating on cold, tragic reflex, her fingers sweep across the cold marble mantel. 1, 2, 3 deeply carved panels until she finds the fourth. She presses the corner, and a massive stone vault groans open. She leaves us with a difficult life lesson to swallow. Sometimes, the tragedy of extreme survival demands that we strip away our own tender humanity just to keep ourselves breathing through the nightmare. The heavy stone shifts inward, swallowing what little oxygen remains in the room. Patricia locates Paul entirely by sound in the pitch black. She hears the tragic, labored drag of his boots, the undeniable rhythm of a broken ruler pretending he is not bleeding to death. Hostile footsteps echo closer, hunting him down. Yet, Patricia does not shatter. She speaks a single, anchoring syllable, summoning the very monster who built her cage. She pulls him into the dark, her fingers instantly coated in the hot slick of his ruined flesh. The massive vault door seals them inside a 3-foot concrete coffin. The ultimate life lesson here is as quiet as the scene itself. True trauma rarely bothers to scream or demand attention. It simply waits patiently in the dark until you are forced to face it. The tiny bunker presses against them like a suffocating physical weight. Pinned chest to chest in the dark, Patricia feels the frantic spike of Paul's breathing as he tries to swallow his agony. Just beyond the cold steel, invaders are violently tearing his grand empire apart. Yet, inside this breathless void, the true psychological tragedy unfolds. Patricia does not beg her captor for safety. Her nervous system has beautifully, terribly adapted to his violence. She stands perfectly still. Paul feels her total lack of fear, and it absolutely terrifies him to his core. This teaches us a heartbreaking life lesson. The saddest reality of the human heart is how incredibly quickly it can learn to turn a terrifying, violent cage into a familiar and comfortable home. Paul exhales his question into the stifling air like a dying ghost, asking how she knew about this secret room. Patricia answers, with devastating flatness, whispering that she knows where everything is. Violent shouts bleed through the thick walls, but the real shift happens right here in the dark. Paul Sawyers, the untouchable architect of her misery, has finally met his own fragile mortality. He is bleeding out, stripped of his godlike grandiosity, relying entirely on the blind woman he thought he owned. She keeps her hand pressed to his ruined arm, tracking his pulse like a living monitor. It reveals a simple life lesson about our darkest moments. When everything is violently taken from you, survival simply becomes a quiet obsession with the few fragile things you can still control. Stick with me here, because this is the exact moment the power dynamic completely shatters. Paul is gasping, his breaths shallow and panicked. The deep wound above his elbow soaks Patricia's palm in thick warmth. In the absolute dark, she performs a silent triage. The blood is not pulsing, meaning he is going to live. But she deliberately keeps this truth to herself, knowing a shattered man cannot listen to reason while bleeding. Just inches away, the chaotic smashing fades into the cold thud of tactical boots reclaiming the floorboards. The immediate panic is receding into grim reality. We can draw a powerful life lesson from this tension. The beautiful truth of any nightmare is that our own fear always broadcasts a much louder echo than the actual threat itself. The narrative camera pushes in on her face. Pale, she calculates the footfalls above. 4, maybe 5 armed men. The initial shock of the ambush has faded, replaced entirely by cold, hard muscle memory. She tracks the violent choreography through the deep vibrations rattling against her spine. Her mind wanders to the expensive Venetian plaster behind her head, applied in 7 obsessive layers. It was the ultimate monument to Paul's desperate need to control everything around him. Now, that monument is shuddering under the boots of unknown killers. It serves as a stark, meaningful life lesson for all of us. No matter how much wealth and power we use to build our safe sanctuaries, it only takes a single spark of chaos to turn them back into primitive hunting grounds. In the suffocating darkness, the wounded apex predator finally stirs. Paul attempts to shift his heavy frame, but Patricia's fingers immediately dig into his bicep like iron claws. She hisses a single, commanding word. Amazingly, the great tyrant freezes in place. He does not surrender out of submission, but out of a tragic realization. The woman he broke is now the only one who can see in the dark. They are trapped in a concrete box, yet the invisible crown has quietly passed to her. Months ago, she memorized every survival tool on these shelves, using only her fingertips. She teaches us a profound life lesson about human endurance. Real authority is rarely given away by those who hold it. Instead, it is patiently and quietly gathered in the dark when nobody else is looking. The camera acts as her mind's eye, expertly mapping the pitch-black shelves around them. A medical kit sits on the second tier. There are 2 heavy flashlights she refuses to touch, knowing a sliver of light beneath the steel door invites certain death. In this breathless, forced intimacy, she studies the ruined titan beside her. Paul has always been a creature of pure, kinetic violence. Right now, his absolute stillness is terrifying. He feels like a live bomb locked inside a velvet box. Yet, fighting every toxic instinct he possesses, he finally surrenders control to her. It is a devastatingly poetic shift that leaves us with a harsh life lesson. True survival often demands that we completely burn down the stubborn, foolish pride that usually keeps us standing. Step into the dark with me. You and I have seen this tragic reversal before. Patricia takes in his quiet surrender, but there is no victory on her face. Ruling your own personal nightmare is just another tragedy. Outside the heavy steel door, a sharp voice cuts through the dust. The massive doors slam shut as the enemy squad fades into the night. The deep rumble of Briggs echoes through the hall, signaling the lockdown. The shootout evaporates into suffocating silence. Patricia goes into autopilot. Her trembling fingers blindly grab the medical case, pinning it to her hip to muffle the click. It leaves us with a cold truth. When your entire world is shattered to pieces, pure iron discipline is sometimes the only thing keeping your lungs breathing. Watch this devastating shift in power. She demands his ruined arm with the coldness of a tired surgeon, and Paul instantly folds. The untouchable king drops his ego and surrenders his bleeding flesh. Patricia grabs it, tracing the torn muscle as if she feels nothing. That is the dead energy of a soul who realized long ago that no savior was coming. The wound is ugly, but he will live. She wraps him up with robotic focus, ignoring the tragic reality that she is patching up the monster who broke her. Still, his presence is suffocating. She feels the heat of his skin, his heavy stare burning through her shell. Here is a lesson for the late hours. Healing the exact same hands that keep tearing your world apart is the most dangerous trap a lonely heart can fall into. No. Paul whispers into the pitch-black room, shaken that she found him in the crossfire. His domineering voice is completely stripped bare. Patricia pulls the bandage tight and drops a heavy truth into the dark. She knew his exact location because she spent endless months memorizing his every move. She read his arrogant playbook, knowing he always near an exit to maintain the illusion of control. The silence that follows is thick with tragedy. It is the sound of a fake god realizing his pathetic mortality. He chokes on his words, swearing that he only wanted to protect her. Patricia just hits him with a cold, tearless agreement. The lesson here is brutal but necessary. To outlive a true predator, you must quietly study their shadow until you master their own twisted game. Her freezing response hangs in the dead air like a curse. 3 heavy knocks strike the steel door. Briggs has returned. Patricia steps back, tossing the broken king a scrap of his shattered ego. Paul shoves the hatch open, and a sickly yellow light bleeds into the bunker. Walk with me as he steps out, forced to witness his ruined life. He stares blankly at the destruction. Millions in shattered glass are scattered across the floor, catching the dim light like fallen stars. His untouchable empire was wiped off the map in 12 agonizing minutes. It is a devastating wake-up call for anyone addicted to the throne. Here is a lesson we all must face. Total control over your fate is a temporary illusion, because one chaotic minute can erase your life forever. Paul stands paralyzed in a suffocating silence. When he finally spins around to face her, the tension threatens to crush them both. The boss has lost his iron grip, his poker face in ruins. She feels his stare burning into her soul, but refuses to offer a comforting word. Admitting their twisted bond right now would ruin everything. Instead, she steps into the sickly yellow light of his wrecked empire. Her shaking hand traces the busted wall until she grabs her cane. She stands beside her captor amidst the broken glass, perfectly silent. Here is the terrifying life lesson. Sharing massive trauma with someone creates a dark, toxic chain infinitely stronger than pure hatred. Standing in his own graveyard, he just whispers one word. Patricia, stay with me in the dark. You and I are going to unpack this tragedy together. This moment is the ultimate portrait of a toxic trauma bond. He drops her name with that flat, heavy voice every master manipulator uses. Patricia turns toward the sound as if it were second nature. Day 366 arrives like a crushing wave. For an entire year, she tracked the sun across the floor and memorized the footsteps of guards. She burned the blueprint of this golden cage into her memory. This happens when a broken soul stops plotting a jailbreak and starts finding comfort in their own nightmare. The life lesson here hits brutally hard. Pure survival mode will actually trick your exhausted brain into falling for the exact same monster who is actively tearing your life apart. She sat entirely frozen when Paul strolled into the room at 9 in the morning. He moves with the smooth energy of a boss who honestly believes he is a god. He sits across the massive table and drops something heavy between them. Patricia does not obedient captive. She is conditioned into playing the obedient captive. He whispers that the 1-year deal is done, the hitmen erased. He details how he brutally dismantled the rival crew and forced the enemy to their knees. He reminds her she sat blindly through 2 of those agonizing shakedowns, and she merely nods. Now she has $5 million in the bank. Carry this vital life lesson with you. What looks like a massive payday is usually just a sick, twisted display of pure psychological dominance. You and I are about to watch the ultimate psychological break. Paul tells her the cash clears today, letting a calculated silence bleed into the room. He slides the release contract across the desk, whispering she is free to walk away. Outside that penthouse, the oblivious world is living a normal day. You hear the hostage far below, blind to the hostage situation unfolding in the clouds. Slowly, Patricia extends a shaking hand. Her fingertips trace the thick paper, feeling the familiar "this twisted" deal. It is a tragic detail. Here is the tragic detail. Here is the point life lesson. When you finally get handed your freedom after surviving pure hell, your brain panics and desperately grabs onto anything physical, just to stay anchored in reality. At the bottom of that heavy page is her signature, trembling exactly like the scribble she made on day one while haunted by those violent tapes. Holding that paper sends Patricia spinning back to the poverty of Delancey Street. She flashes back to the wobbly diner table and the $61 shoved in her apron. That past life was ripped away by Paul, a ruthless man who weaponized her blindness to gain an edge. She remembers waking up that first night in his bunker, surrounded by cold designer sheets and a dead silence that carried a massive price tag. She thinks of all those shady shipping logs she quietly documented in Braille. Here is the undeniable life lesson. When pushed into a dark corner by a predator, every single tiny detail becomes a weapon for survival. Let us examine the shadows of this broken heart. Patricia thinks back to that panic room and how the boss casually reached out his arm in the pitch black. Tragically, she did not pull away. She is anchored to the agonizing way he whispered her name in the dark. We are looking at the fatal level of a hostage losing their mind. She is confusing a predator with romance, honestly thinking he was the only one truly seeing her soul. Her whole life, the world stared at her blindness with cheap pity, but Paul threw this consuming obsession her way, and it scrambled her radar. She confused silent mornings for a real relationship. Here is your haunting life lesson. Total isolation will fry your brain, making it dangerously easy to mistake a manipulative kidnapper for a true soulmate. We must analyze how this kingpin masked his suffocating control. He filled her closet with elegant outfits, dressing up his sick domination to look like a caring protector. He would sit in the silence at 2 a.m, faking vulnerability to pull her closer. He knew exactly how much she could handle, because a predator always studies the prey. Trapped in that penthouse, Patricia surrendered to the illusion. She tragically convinced herself that after 31 years of being invisible, she found someone who understood her scars. The horror of a trauma bond is that you cannot unsee that fake reality once it takes root. This life lesson hits brutally hard. A heart starved for affection will refuse $5 million just to keep holding on to a dangerously fake connection. Now we arrive at this devastating power play. You and I can see right through it. Acting like she is taking back control, Patricia grabs the paper and rips the mob contract down the middle. The thick paper fought back for a second, a tragic metaphor for her wrecked defenses. She drops the torn halves onto the desk, folding her hands like an ice queen. The room goes deadly quiet. Paul whispers her name with his creeping villain voice. She fires back, demanding he put it on the record that she knows exactly what she is choosing. She declares she might only have $5, but she holds more dirt on his empire than anyone alive. It teaches us a deeply sad truth. We try desperately hard to sound smart about our absolute worst choices, just to pretend we are still the ones steering the car. Listen closely to the quiet tragedy of a soul surrendering to the dark. She looks at the man who broke her and whispers that she is staying. Her reason is chilling. In this one room, the shadows change nothing. It is a devastating confession of how easily a weary heart trades true freedom for a counterfeit sense of belonging. Paul exhales, settling into his chair like a king who just watched an empire fall. His heavy hand reaches across the table, entirely swallowing both of hers. This is the exact same hand that once pinned her against a shaking train window, offering a sick illusion of protection. He holds her in absolute, crushing silence. Let this sink into your bones tonight, my friends. True safety will always give you the power to walk out the front door whenever you choose. It never conditions you to turn the key on your own cage. Then comes the moment that truly shatters the soul. Instead of pulling away, Patricia turns her hands and grips his fingers right back, sealing a bitter trauma. Bond, isolated from the world, She sits in her glass prison, convinced she chose this nightmare. The torn contract still lies scattered on his desk. This is the terrifying brilliance of a predator. This is the terrifying brilliance of a predator. He twists her reality so thoroughly that she will fight to defend her own chains, swearing she forged the locks, and she forged the locks herself. It is a flawless psychological checkmate. As we sit here in the quiet of the night, hold on to this vital lesson. The deadliest traps rarely look like prisons from the outside. We must always find the courage to carefully question the cages where we feel the safest.